Omaha.
Yeah.
The last time we saw each other was like every day in Omaha. How are you guys?
Great. Hey, Laura, what's the perception around the SEC of what Chad Morris is doing? Obviously, nothing went until they won. What's your perception?
I think the perception is that Chad Morris is a really good coach and a really good play caller, and that he's maybe a couple years away, who knows, maybe even sooner than that, of really getting this thing to a point where Arkansas can be scary again, and a team that I think people will be afraid to play. It's obviously, and coaches understand this, and obviously those of us who follow the game understand this, when you're trying to come in and implement a new system and you may not have the exact right personnel for that system, it's always difficult to do. So I think there is a ton of respect for what he's doing. People really like him. The other key thing that I hear a lot, and we've seen this already, is that he's tapping into the Texas recruiting base, which is absolutely huge for Arkansas's future.
Is it weird that the SEC championship locked up with 3 weeks to go in the season?
A little bit. It'd be nice if there was a little more drama down the stretch maybe, but I think the thing about that is that even going into the season, there was a lot that we didn't know outside of Alabama and Georgia, but we pretty much knew that those two teams would be the teams that would end up facing off. They just are a step above everybody else right now, and there's been a lot of really fun, interesting competition, I think, right below them, and teams showing that bridging that gap may happen sooner than a lot of us thought. I think for a while there, Florida had sort of launched itself into the conversation. Texas A&M played Alabama closer than anybody else. So some of these coaching changes that happened this past offseason really have seemed to pay dividends already this year. It's just, the Alabamas and the Georgias of the world are just a little bit better than everybody else right now. And I think it's going to be exciting to see what happens in the SEC championship game, because once again, it's an opportunity. If Georgia wins, they really are positioning themselves potentially to get into the playoff, and I don't think the committee would drop Alabama out. So we could once again, in that scenario, depending on what happens elsewhere, see 2 SEC teams in the college football playoff.
Temps are supposed to be in the 30s tomorrow night. Think it will have any impact on either team, especially LSU?
Yeah. I mean, look, you would think that maybe Arkansas guys are a little more used to this weather than LSU. It gets chilly sometimes in Baton Rouge, but usually it's pretty balmy. So I think that factors in for sure. And we were even talking about this. I was just with the Hasselbeck brothers who played at Boston College. We were doing the NC State Wake Forest game, and they were talking about this Clemson game this weekend and the temps being in the 30s, how they think it factors in for Clemson not being comfortable. So I do think that that's a real deal in all this. Some of these guys, some of these younger guys especially, may not have played in games that cold. If they're from the South, if they're from warmer places, this could be new for them. And I tell you what, I've never been tackled or tackled somebody on a cold football field, but I've heard it doesn't feel great. So that could be a point in the game that could end up mattering.
What are some things that LSU really struggles with that you think Arkansas might be able to take advantage of?
Yeah, I do think at times LSU's offense hasn't looked as balanced and creative as maybe it should. And that's been sort of the, kind of story about LSU. You thought that Joe Burrow coming in is a really talented quarterback and maybe the piece missing for them. And I think he's played really well at times, and we've seen that certainly. But then, obviously you even look back to the game against Florida where he just unfortunately threw a last-minute interception. There are ways to make him uncomfortable and to make their offense one-dimensional, and I think that's going to be key for Arkansas from that standpoint. And then, defensively, they're incredibly talented. You may be able to, do some things against them if they're really committing to man defense. Maybe, you just win those 50-50 balls, and that's where Arkansas's receivers are going to have to step up big time. But I also think too, if Arkansas, especially knowing they've had a bye week, Chad Morris has some tricks up his sleeve. So if he can come out with a few things that maybe they're not expecting, some different looks that could confuse their defense a little bit, maybe some misdirection even before the play begins, that could put them in a situation to catch them off guard. And Arkansas is just going to have to win those opportunities. Whenever they get them, they're going to have to take advantage of them.
Joe Burrow hasn't thrown a touchdown pass since September. Do you think he's been a little underwhelming this season?
Yeah, no and yes. I mean, it's kind of hard to answer that because I think some of it's had to do with the competition that they've faced. I'm not sure many are saying that they're throwing a bunch of touchdowns on Alabama's defense at this point. They have faced some really talented defenses. So, like I said before, I think Joe Burrow is a step up at the quarterback position compared to what LSU's had in recent years, but he may have been a little bit overhyped there for a while. And, now he's going to go on the road in this environment after coming off a tough home loss that really was their chance to get into the college football playoff. I think the psychology of this game is the most important from LSU's standpoint. What do they have to play for anymore? You could argue that being ranked 7th is almost like being ranked 25th at this point when you're out of the playoff mix and you really don't have a path to it. Your season becomes a little different. And yeah, they could play their way into a really good bowl game and all that, but I think we all know that when players have that, they can taste it, they're that close to the playoff. That's where I think Joe Burrow's leadership more than anything is going to have to factor in for tomorrow's game for him.